Awesome. Let's move on to explore multiple user login, user registration, having multiple users conversing with the server simultaneously. All right. Okay. All right. Yeah. Right. So up to this point, right now, when I go to the dashboard, right, it's just me. Right. I'm the single user who's using this. Right. So this user interface is agnostic to whoever's using this. Right. It's the same user interface to whoever it comes to this user interface. Anybody can be using this. So if I deploy this central server and folks navigate to my Netlify user interface, right? Everybody would be able to create courses, delete courses, update modules, right? The whole thing. And people from the West Coast, East Coast, from Europe, anywhere in the world, if they know the URL for my Netlify, anybody can update everything. Yeah, there's no distinction on who's using this. What we want to be able to do is provide a multi-user experience, right? Where I can identify myself, log in, right, and say, hey, I'm Alice, and then I like to see the information that is related to me specifically, right? But if I log in as Bob, right, I can see my courses, I can delete my courses, I can update courses, add modules, and that's specific to Bob, or Charlie, or Frank, or Ed, right? And have multiple users simultaneously, right, at the same time. And so the server needs to be able to maintain conversations, right, with all these folks, so that when you ask for courses or modules, it'll be within the context of the person who's currently logged in. Yes? And it will know that if I give you the courses, these will be Alice's courses or Bob's courses, right? For the person who's logged in. Now, there's one problem to this, though, right? By default, the HTTP protocol cannot remember or distinguish, right, from one request from another. Right? So if two requests are coming in from two different browsers, in different parts of the world, right? The server has there's nothing in the protocol, in the HTTP protocol, right, that would allow the server to distinguish, right, one request from another. Okay, so this limited a lot of the kinds of things that we could build. Right? One of the earlier solutions to this was that the URL could the server would generate the URLs. So the buttons that you would click or the hyperlinks that you would click would contain, right, user information or an ID, right, that would follow the same person, okay, as long as they were interacting with that particular application. This was called URL encoding, right? And it was very popular. It was one of the earliest solutions to this, right, where I could, the server would generate a token, and it would be embedded as part of the URL, either the query or embedded in the path, so that every subsequent query, right, Alice would send me one ID, but Bob would send me a different ID, right, and then I would be able to determine, oh, it's you want the weather, right, on the West Coast, and you want the weather on the East Coast, right, and I could remember, right, that Alice was on the East Coast and Bob was on the West Coast or whatever, right? And so I could send the right data to the right person. But that was not enough, right? There was no way for me to come back tomorrow and still remember that it was me, right? There was nothing that the browser would provide. It would know that it was the same person once I identify myself, right? But there was no way for it to remember me. So a solution to this was to create another protocol on top of HTTP. Okay, another mechanism on top of HTTP, we know now as cookies. Right? So cookies is a mechanism by which the server and the client agree, right, that the client will store, right, identifiable information or identifiable token, right, on the browser, and then the browser agrees to provide that identification over to the server, in subsequent queries, right? So that the server can distinguish one token from Alice, distinguish it from one token from Bob, right? But it has to be stored on the browser, right, in a file in a database, so that they can establish identity later on. And so here's a diagram that illustrates the mechanism. Right? So here's Alice, who's going to interact with a website called acme.com. And you can imagine here, not just Alice, but simultaneously, Bob, Charlie, Frank, Dan, they're all doing the same thing, right? At the same time. Right? They all want to talk to acme.com. And presumably it's the very first time for all of them. They've never been to acme.com, right? So here's an illustration of what's happening to all of them simultaneously. So here's Alice. She comes to, she types acme.com. She presses enter at her browser. And the first thing that the browser does is, before going out to acme.com, if Alice has cookies, right, because she absolutely could disable cookies and she doesn't want to participate in any of this. I don't want any tracking, right? But obviously then she won't be able to log in. She won't be able to, do anything that is peculiar to her, right? But she does want to be able to log in and whatnot, right? So if she has enabled cookies, the browser will check to see in a local database, in the local browser, in its own cookie jar, right, to see if the browser has any cookies for acme.com. Right? Do I have any cookies that the server might have given me in the past? Well, no, she doesn't, because she's never been to acme.com. Right? No cookies. So the browser says, "Oh, okay, well, this must be the very first time." Right? So the request is sent out to acme.com without the cookie. Cookies are embedded as part of the header. Right? When the request goes out, there's a header, and then there's a body, right, and the URL, obviously, right. And so no header for the cookie, and so the server says, "Oh, it must be the first time," right. So what I'll do, I'll generate a brand new cookie for you, a random ID, right. And cookies are created in name value pairs. So you give the name to the cookie and then the value of that cookie. It also creates for Alice, right, for that session ID or that unique identifier, it creates a data structure in memory in the server, just like our arrays, right? We could create arrays and data structures, obviously, yes. Well, it creates one, instantiates a new object. Typically, it's a hash table, right, where you can put name value pairs in there. You can store anything you want, but it creates this data structure, and applications like the applications that we're writing, the server applications, can store information in there for Alice. Or, right, because remember, this is happening simultaneously for Bob, for Charlie, for Dan, yes? So our application, as it's running for Bob, for Charlie simultaneously, we could store information here specifically that is either for Bob or for Charlie or for Dan, right? This data structure is tagged. This primary key, this unique identifier, is used to index or find, right, this data structure later on, right, for the same key. So once I have that key is sent over to the browser in a cookie header. And again, if the browser is participating in a cookie, in the cookie protocol, it will save it to the local database, right? So that subsequently, in the next request, in subsequent requests, now the browser, when it goes to the database, it will find the cookie for acme.com, right? And it will include it in the headers out to the server. And the server says, "Oh, you have a cookie." It validates the cookie. It sees that it hasn't timed out, right? That it's within a particular time range, right? Also, it validates that the cookie was generated by, because all cookies typically are signed, right, or encrypted, so that I know that I generated, this is my cookie that I generated myself. So once it validates it, it says, yes, I will find the data structure that I had created earlier. Any information that you would have stored in there in prior are still there, right? based on your application. Say it could be a shopping cart, or it could be your profile or preferences, whatever, right? And that data that you store in there, right, in a hash table, will be there for Alice, because Alice has provided Alice's cookie. For Bob, same thing, right? Bob will have provided a different cookie, so it would be a different instance of the HTTP session. Yes, right? So Bob would have his shopping cart, right? His preferences stored in that data structure. Okay, whatever logic we might have in our application, in our server application. Also, when these HTTP session, whenever we receive a cookie for a valid cookie for an HTTP session, there's a timer that goes out, that goes off, that's reset, right? These session objects can only live for a specific amount of time, typically for 20, 30 minutes, can be configured, right? If we haven't received that cookie for that specific session, the session object is removed from memory. Okay. Now the server, cannot just keep these session objects instantiated indefinitely, right? Because we could have dozens, hundreds, thousands of users are coming, yes? And for each instance object, right, for each user that comes in, we would need to instantiate a new session object, yes? And keep it in memory. So that could become very expensive memory-wise, yes? We could easily run out of memory, right? The machine, the computer, right, would have to maintain, a few bytes or maybe megabytes or kilobytes for each user. If you have thousands of users, you could easily run out of memory quickly, right? So typically these sessions are timed, right? If we haven't heard from you any cookies from the last 20 minutes, right, the memory is returned, right? It's garbage collected, right? We also say typically that whenever a server needs to remember something about a particular user, right, we say that those are stateful applications that needs to maintain state for a user, right? And typically those applications are harder to scale, right? Because if you want to support more users, well, you'll need many more computers, much more memory, much more CPU, as opposed to, right, if your application is completely stateless, that you don't have to remember anything about anyone, then those typically stateless applications are easier to scale, right? Because it's easy to go from 1,000 users that you don't have to remember anything, right? It's easy to go from 1,000 to 100,000 because you still don't have to remember anything, right? So you can use the same CPU, the same memory, right? To handle 1,000 users as 100,000 users, right? Because I don't have any burden of having to remember anything. It's just network, right? Network processing, yes, right? So we try to minimize, when we try to implement these applications, we try to minimize the state footprint, right, of users that we have to maintain and remember anything, right? Again, to try and make it easier to scale up, right? Too easy to go from 1,000 to 100,000 users. Yes? Okay. Anyway, remember, again, this is happening simultaneously for multiple users. This session typically provides some API that allows you to write to the session and read from the session and retrieve data from the session. So let's practice that, right? Let's practice reading and writing to the session, okay? So to do that, there's a library that we're going to be using. Now, all these that I've discussed, this is true for any server, any infrastructure, technology stack, right? Whether using .NET, Java, Python, right? This is true for all infrastructures or technology stacks, right? What's different is that each vendor, each technology stack will have its own libraries, right? Its own syntax, right? Its own little quirks, right? So I'm going to be using Node.js, right? And it'll be a Node.js library, yes. But the general concepts are the same across, all languages, all servers, right? So I'm going to be using a library called Express Session, right? So let's do that. So on the server, let's stop the server, and I'm going to npm install Express Session. Okay, and I'll restart the server. Okay, so back in the app.js, we're going to import Express Session. Here we go, and to say that now for every query that comes in, right? For every query that comes in, parse the cookies. See if there are cookies. Yes. If there are any cookies, then let's try and find the session for that particular cookie, right? If there are no cookies, create a brand new cookie, right? And then tag a new session object for it, okay? Now, to do that, we use the library that we just imported, and we're going to configure it. So one of the configurations is that we can tag it, we can use a string that it can use to sign, right, the cookie and make sure that it's encrypted, right, and that it created it, right, to make sure that nobody's tampering with the cookie, right? Nobody's trying to inject any identity to it, or somebody trying to steal somebody's identity, somebody's cookie, to impersonate someone else, right? So this is a secret. Typically, you would not put it in the source code like this. Typically, it would be an environment variable that you would load it from a secure computer, right? That only a system administrator would have access to the string, right? It could be any string, but it should be secret. Nobody should know what the string is. If you leave it like that and you store it in a source control, everybody could see what the secret is, right? And anybody can impersonate you, right? Then we say false. So these are just standard things. There we go. Okay. There's another one. What was it? Cookie. You can put the max age, how long it can live. But let's leave it like that. Okay, so that configures the session object, right? So now, just like Express.json added for us the body, right? This request body, that's added by this guy, Express.json. It parses JSON from the body, right? And then it makes it available in the request.body. Well, this is going to parse cookies, right, from the header, right? And it's going to instantiate this session for us for that ID, right? And it's going to make available in the request, it will make available a brand new object. The hash table I mentioned, the data structure, will be available to us now in the request.session object. And we're going to be able to treat it as an array, as a map, right, with key value pairs, right? So let's do that. Let's play around with the session. So we'll say session exercise, right? And we want to illustrate, right, that we can read and write from the session. So export default function, right? And we want to create app.get. We want to be able to API session. I want to set into my data structure, into my hash table, right? And again, this hash table is different for Alice, and then Bob gets a different hash table, and Frank gets a different hash table, right? And so here it is. So we have a like that, right? So I am parsing. I am going to embed in my URL, right, a key value, just to show you how that we can store stuff in my hash table. I'm going to extract from the parameters the name and the value, and I'm going to use the name as a key. Actually, I prefer this as a key. Let's use this as key. Key. right? So there it is. Request.session is the data structure that gets created. For Alice, she gets one. Bob gets a completely different one. So each one of us has different, right? Notice that at this level, it's a higher level of abstraction. We never actually see the cookie, right? That's all internal from the library. The library does the parsing of the cookie, creates this new data structure, right? Or keeps track of it and then just passes it to us in the request here. Otherwise, we would have to done that ourselves. We would have to create a map, right? We would have to parse the cookie, right? And then create and maintain these session data structures ourselves. Instead, this is all done for us, right? By the time it gets to us, here I'll get either Alice's or Bob's or Charlie's or Frank's session object. Yes, keyed off of that cookie. And so here's the value. So I stored something. So for instance, I might put the key might be, say, shopping cart, right? And the value might be pencil and notebook, right? And this is Alice. But Bob, at the same time, is also putting in his shopping cart something else. Yes? And they will coexist, right? Alice will have her values, and Bob will have his values, right? And we would like to be able to retrieve what's in I want to get, given the key, right? I'm going to respond. I'm going to send back session has the value key, right? So maybe key equal value, and then key equal value, like that. So this allows me to, I'm just illustrating that we can write data and then we can retrieve the data. Okay? And also we can destroy, you can say app-get, just destroy the session. Say that destroy, right? For instance, if I want to log out, right? Say I'm using a public computer, not my own computer. Right? If it's my own computer, I don't care. I might step away, right? And I don't have the risk of somebody, trying to impersonate me while I'm away. Yes. But if I'm using a public computer, right? If I step away, I run the risk that somebody sits in there and I'm still logged in, right? And they can impersonate me. Yes. So I should be able to destroy, right, my session and say, hey, whatever conversation we were having, forget about it, right? Throw everything away. So we can destroy the session, and any information that I had stored there, it's gone. Okay. All right, so let's try it out. Let's bring in the session, import the session exercise, right, and then pass the session app like that, and let's try it out. So to illustrate this, let's so here's going to be Alice interacting with her session, and in a different browser, let's say Safari, we're going to have Bob also interacting with the same session, right? So we're going to have it separate here. Okay. So here let's have Alice going to HTTP localhost 4000 API session dot set, and then she's going to put in her cart, right? She's going to put some pencil and a notebook, right? And so the session is remembering, right, that the cart for Alice, for her cookie, we can see her cookie. We can say, we can inspect, we can see in the network, if we refresh, we can see that in the headers, there was a cookie, right? And it has this value. And notice that this value, it's a very long value, but it's notice the last 4 characters, right? KS4AY. See that? If I refresh, right, the cookie should be the same. Yeah, KS4AY, right? It's the same person, has the same cookie, and this is how the server knows that this is her data structure. Yes. Now, if Bob is doing the same thing, and but he's doing a cart, he's putting a pen and a book. Okay, we can inspect, right, and we can see in the network, we can see pen, book, and we see the cookies. There's a cookie. See that? And his cookie is different. We can't see. Storage, local storage. No, cookies. There we go. Yeah, here's the value. Here's the value. It's a very long value. Can't see it. But it's different. This is a S percentage, right? This is a S percent 3ACU, and Alice's is S percent 3AM. See that? It's different. So if Bob retrieves his, he gets his cart. Notice that he gets indeed pen and book, right, for his cookie, 3ACU something. But if Alice comes back and she gets her cart, right, retrieves the values, same values that I had put in there, and notice that the cookies is for her, right? So it's different. So if I'm so the same, notice it's the same URL. See that? It's the same URL. Even though it's the same URL, they're responding to different values. See that, right? And the only way is that the server is using two different data structures keyed off to different carts. And then she can destroy this. She can say destroy, right? Session is destroy. So if she tries to get again for the cart, it's going to be undefined. It's gone. There's nothing there anymore. But Bob hasn't destroyed. His is still returning that he still has a pen and a book in his cart. Make sense? Right? So on top of this, we're going to build register, login, be able to look at your own profile. Yes? And then for individual people that are logged in, we'll be able to retrieve, Alice's cart or Alice's courses, right? Or Bob's courses, right? And each one will be able to edit their own personal information. Yes? All right, so let's build that. Okay, so what we want to do in the user interface, what we're going to do is that in the account here, right, we're going to build a set of screens that are going to be able to register, log in, right, look at our own personal profile. So let's do that. So let's, I'm going to build it outside of Canvas. Ideally, I would just build it inside of like an account directory here, right? But I'm going to build it so that you could use this for other projects, right? You could use it for, you can embed it in your own projects or whatnot, okay? So I'll put it under, say, users here, right? And in here, let's create a few screens. We'll create register.tsx, right? So this will be so we'll have export default function register, and so we'll have a const user with username and password. Okay, we'll import use state and register. We'll fit that in a minute. Return, we're going to have with a couple of input fields, one for editing the username and one editing the password. And on click, it'll hit the register function here. Okay, we'll probably also need login. So this is login. Login is going to look very similar to register. Right, so this is login. So I'll call this login. Right, again, username and password, login. Can't type. And this is login. Right, and this is login. login, right? We'll do profile in a second, but let's put this in an account here, right? So let's see, we have we'll create an account here, account, and we'll have an index.tsx, right? And we'll do an export default account. And export like that. And so what we'll do here is that we'll have maybe some routes, right? That will allow us to do route, right? If it's a register, we display a register. And register, we're going to load that. We're going to import the register. If we have a login, we'll go to login. Okay, something like that, right? And maybe we can have a default. We'll say that navigate, right? We'll say that if it's none of them, I'll automatically go to login. Yes. Let's see what else, and we can bring this into the canvas, and so here, if it's an account, we can display the account, this brand new account component, like that, right? Account component, and if it's anything like account slash register or account slash login, where we'll see different components, right? So there's account, there's account, default function, blah, blah, blah. What is it complaining? To login, login. Let's see. Oh, okay, it is going to login. What are you complaining? What don't you like about login? Console. No routes match login. Huh? Oh, I know. It's account login. Okay, these are all. So this is account. Like that, canvas, and then why are you login? Canvas, blah blah blah, account, yada yada yada, account. So this should be canvas slash account slash login, and this is like that, right? Something like that. Canvas account. There we go. So there's login. Maybe add some some class name. Maybe put some container fluid. Just a little bit. Okay, there's login. Yes. And probably we would want to be able to navigate between login and registration. Yes. And so maybe we could have if you're in login and you don't have an account, right? Maybe you could have a link. So let's import link. So import link, right? And so as a button here, we can have a link to register, right? So I can click on register, and that takes me to register, and vice versa, right? So if I am in register, right, I'll have a link that allows me to go to login if I do have an account, and this is login. Okay, everybody good? Right. Now, if I register or if I log in both cases, presumably I would end up logging in. If I register, then I am the currently logged in user. Or if I log in, also I am the currently logged in user. In both cases, it would navigate me to my profile screen. Yes, right, and it would show my personal information. So let's create a placeholder for the profile. Right, so we'll do profile.tsx. Right, and then export default function profile like that, right? And for now, what we'll do for both in register, what we'll do is that we're going to navigate to the profile in both cases, right? So we'll bring in use navigate. So use navigate is a hook that allows us to programmatically navigate, right? As opposed to clicking a hyperlink, right? If I click on a hyperlink, it navigates to that route, yes? But sometimes we want to do it because we ran some logic, we calculate it, right? And the end of the calculation is that we need to navigate, yes? So this allows us to navigate programmatically. We'll say navigate to login to profile, right? In both cases, whether I am registering or if I'm logging in, right? In both cases, I'm going to navigate to profile, and I need to bring in use navigate, right? And get the navigate, okay? I'll also need the new route in account, right? So if this is a profile, I want to need the profile. There we go. All right. So there it is. So if I log in, I click log in, right, and it navigates to my profile. Everybody good? Right. So obviously, I don't just want to blindly go to the profile. I want to hit the server first, right? See if this user exists, right, and things like that. Okay. So we need a kind of like a database of users. I am providing you with a database of users. I'm giving you a couple of users here. So I'm going to download that, and I'm going to save them in our local database, right? So users, and so in our server, we can add it to our database. So in our database, we're going to import users from users and you add them here, right? And so now we need to export this. We need to export the endpoints that are going to allow us to, if we type the login, we have to see if that user exists, right, in the database. Or if we register, we need to add a new user to that array. Yes, right. So let's do that. So in a new set of routes for users, right, of JS, okay, we would give access to this data, right? So, oh wait, this is actually no, I think I made a mistake. So delete a file called routes. There we go. So let's create the routes in here. So this is export default user routes, right? And so what can we do? Well, obviously there's all the different CRUD operations, but some of them might not make sense, right? Or at least not all the use cases. For instance, would you be able to retrieve all the users? Probably not, right? Well, unless you're an administrator, you could, right? But normally, nobody should be able to just retrieve a list of all the users and their passwords and everything, right? But I'm going to leave it here because it's useful for debugging, at least, as a developer, right? Making sure that, I added a new user, I like to be able to see if the user is in there. So it's useful for me as a developer, but maybe not as a part of the application. Or maybe at least I would need to test to see that only if you are an assistant administrator, then you would have access to this data, right? Not just anybody, okay? So all users, maybe find a user by their primary key. Maybe this one makes sense. That is available to, well, maybe not to everybody, right? Or maybe if I'm visiting somebody else's profile, then yes, maybe might make sense, right? I'm visiting somebody else's profile, and that profile knows the ID of that person, and then it would fetch the ID of that person's profile. Maybe that makes sense, right? Creating a user, I don't know. Probably that's also like a system administrator that has like a, some form that they can willy-nilly create any user, right? New users. So let's focus on the ones that me as mere mortal would be able to, add myself. How would I add myself? I would add myself by having, register, right? As a mere mortal, I should be able to log in I should be able to update myself, right? I should be able to, well, maybe not delete myself. I should be able to log out, right? I should be able to delete, no. Maybe get my profile, right? Once I log in, once I've identified myself, and I navigate to my profile should say, oh yeah, it's you, it's still you, right? It insists on deleting. Let's import the database, which is in, I think in database / index, right? So what would register look like? So register would look like, presumably I am going to pass the username and password, right? And in the body, right? I've filled out my register screen. I submit register and my username password coming in here. I'm going to post these. And so that's in the body. That's in the body. One of the things I might want to do is check to see if this user already exists, right? If this username is already taken, I should not add them to the database of users, right? So I might do something like cons existing user, fetch in the current database of users for someone who has the same username, right? If the user already exists, I am going to send back an error saying, nope, that username is already taken. You cannot register, right? So otherwise, yes, I am going to create a brand new primary key, right, for this new user, and I'm going to add them to my database of users. And I'm going to respond with a new user, okay? Okay, also, I would want this person to be logged in. I want to remember, because remember, register is going to try to navigate to the profile. So 2 requests. One is going to create the user. The profile needs to be able to remember, oh, this is the same user. I should display the user that was just created, right? And they are logged in. I need to remember that they have already identified themselves. They've provided the credentials, right? They are the logged in user. So I am going to remember that. I'm going to put it in my session. My request.session, I'm going to put in a token, right, in a key that we can all agree, right, as a team, right, that in that session variable, right, we're going to store the currently logged in user. And this is simultaneous, right, because there's a different session for Alice, there's a different session for Bob. So if Bob logs in or registers, Bob is going to be in that session variable, yes? But as Frank registers, there'll be a different current user in Frank's current user, yes? Make sense? Right? So that if I navigate to my profile, I will see Alice's profile. But if Bob navigates to his profile, he will see his profile. Make sense? Right? How about login? Login, same thing. The credentials are going to be in the body, including the username and password. I'm going to look up for the user in my database, right? I'm going to just looking for somebody who matches username and password. If there is, then I'm going to log them in. The current user is the user I just found. I found the user. I'm going to put him. I'm going to remember that this is the user, and I'm going to respond with the user. Otherwise, if I didn't find him, I'll send back an unauthorized access. You're trying to log in, right? I don't know who you are, right? I'm not making you the currently logged in user, okay? Finally, in logout, I'm just going to destroy the session. I'm going to forget, if anybody was logged in. Nobody's logged in anymore. And profile, I'm going to retrieve this current session to see if somebody's logged in, right? If somebody already just recently registered, or they recently logged in, right, and they put the current user in the session. If there is, I'll return it. Otherwise, I'm going to say, oh, you're not logged in, and maybe I'll kick you out to a login screen. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So I think we have the minimal what we need. So let's go back to our app.js and import our user routes, right? And add them here, user route. Also, another thing, course. Course, we haven't configured anything yet, right? But now we opened ourselves to anybody. We say, well, anybody can talk to us. Well, now we are going to deal with private information, right? With sensitive information. You're going to be passing in credentials, right? Other, private information. So we can't just open up to anybody. We have to narrow down and say, no, actually, I only really want to talk to my user interface, not just anybody, right? Because it is only my user interface that I'm going to allow to send me this secure information, right? So I can narrow that and say, no, I'm only accepting from this particular domain. Yes? And I also say they're going to be sharing with me sensitive information, credentials. And we turn that on, right? This turns on cookies, right? This turns on parsing out credentials, information from the cookie. Okay. All right. I think we have enough what we need. Let's go back to the front end. So in the front end, we need to be able to talk to this API. We need to expose, right, all these functions, all this functionality. We need to expose it to the front end. So how do we expose it? We're going to expose it through APIs, right? This one for fetching all users. That is the correct RESTful web API. Not that it would be very that's not that this is a very realistic use case that I am allowing anybody to access all the users. Probably not. So I'm not going to work with those. I really care about the ones about logging in. Okay, so let's do those. So let's do users. I want to register. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to call register. Okay. Well, I can't be using get, first of all, because I want to be able to send data embedded in the body, the username and password, right? I mean, I guess I could have, instead of passing in the body, I could have included it as path variables. No, that's a bad choice, right? Because the credentials would be encoded in clear text, right, as part of the URL, right? So as that request is going through the internet, through the World Wide Web, it's going through many servers in between, as it gets to the destination, right? And all along, anybody can see the credentials that you're passing around, okay? So no, that's a bad choice. Instead, right, the most secure is to send instead a post, right? So a post, it will include it inside of the body, right? Now, by default, it'll still be in clear text. So again, anybody in between will be able to see the body that you are passing around. But this will at least allow you to use, instead of just plain old HTTP, it will allow you to use also HTTPS, okay? And HTTPS will encode, it will encrypt, any data that is encoded in the body, right? So that only both ends, right? Only the ends will be able to see the data. No one in between, right? Even though it's passing through everybody in between, it'll be just gibberish to anyone in between. Only the ends will be able to see the data. Yes? But you can only do that with post, not get, right? So we have that. And also notice that we are creating a new user, so post is very fitting. Yes? But one thing that is breaking the RESTful convention is that we have a verb in there. See that? Register? That's a verb, right? That's okay, right? It is a very narrow edge case, narrow use case, right? Where we are dealing with security, right? And so this is not just any data structure, right? We are identifying ourselves. So it's okay for that. For those purposes, it's okay. Same thing for login. Even though login is not creating a new user, right? Logging is looking for a user that already exists. Yes, presumably, but it's not creating a new user. So technically, we should not be using post, right? But again, we're using post for security purposes. We want to be able to pass data in the body that's going to be encoded, right, using SSL, right? And finally, we have get profile.